Welcome back to another episode of the Packs What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein, and the Packers schedule has finally been released. I don't know about you, Perry. Obviously, love the draft. It's my favorite part of the offseason. But when the schedule comes out, it makes everything finally feel real. Like, as much as the draft brings new players into the building and we see the offseason program and, we see guys start to put on the green and gold again, the schedule coming out is when it actually starts to kind of like get me ready for the season. We see, kind of who the first stretch is. We see the primetime games. We see when the division games fall. And I'm just ready now. Now the problem is waiting until August.
I know. Yeah, it is real. It's pretty wild. It's just that time of year where we have about 3 or so weeks of no football news. So they stick the schedule in kind of in that middle ground, and now we just get excited and wait. I love that this is like the time where all the teams' social media teams get to shine. This is their moment. You get to watch all the fun, creative things that teams have been able to do, and it's funny because I feel like they used to just like send it out in a letter in the mail for people on a piece of paper, and now it's just like a whole production, which is fun, right? Because I mean, even with the Packers, like they made that video, which was amazing. There were all the Packers personalities and celebrities who are fans, and you get to see a little personality from the players. So that's fun.
Yeah, I like the different approaches that teams take, right? Like the Chargers did a Sims one, which is
So
really
funny.
fun and relevant. The Bears did like an 80s throwback, brought in some Mean Girls, for theirs, which hate giving the Bears credit for literally anything, but that was kind of fun. So it is always cool to see like what certain teams come up with to do these releases. But let's jump in here right away. Obviously, we've known for a while now that the Packers were going to be traveling week 1 to Brazil to take on the Eagles, which I thought was really interesting. I think it was Mike Spofford had a nugget that the Packers and the Eagles are like the only teams in the NFL that haven't had a week 1 home opener in the 2020s. So kind of funny that both of those teams end up at a neutral site for week 1. But then, as expected, the Packers are home in week 2 to take on the Indianapolis Colts in a noon game. And that starts a stretch for them of a lot of noon games. They've got 3 noon games in a row, one 325 game, and then another stretch of noon games. So really getting all of their early games done early in the season and then shifting to basically all prime time to close out the year.
Yeah, it is an interesting schedule. It's obviously very hard to predict because you're kind of looking at these teams as who they were last season in terms of opponent, and you can obviously make educated guesses based on who is going to be good going into the season. You can circle naturally the 49ers game, the Dolphins game, the Texans game as games, and this is probably me revealing the games I'm most excited for, but as games that are going to be more difficult. But there's always surprise opponents that pop up who end up being, above 500 and potential playoff contenders. For me, to your point, it is interesting that they're kind of going to be like early slot guys and then move into the primetime games. I know a lot of people were talking about how the Packers have 4 primetime games in a row. I don't know if I necessarily have any issue with that. I think when you actually break it down, they end up getting a bit of a mini bye in there due to the fact that they go from Thursday to Thursday. So it's a full week. And then a Thursday to a Sunday, right? So they get some extra time in there from Thursday to Sunday night from the Lions to the Seahawks. And then from Sunday to Monday, from Seahawks to the Saints, again, they have an extra day from there. And then they go back to noon game for the Vikings. So while it is interesting that they have a number of primetime games, that's actually not that different from last season. Our young budding rookies of the 2023 Packers also had, I think, 4 or 5 primetime games. So this is not going to be new. The Green Bay Packers, I think, are always going to be in primetime. Everyone's going to be very excited to see what year 2 Jordan Love looks like. So they should have. I was expecting this. they should have expected this. It is just interesting that it fell all in a row.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting too that there's only one stretch of back-to-back road games, and it's the Lions game going into Seattle, with which is where you mentioned that mini bye Thursday to Sunday. Otherwise, I mean, we had seen stretches where they're away for multiple weeks at a time, and you're going like
Mhm.
east to west coast, and it just, as far as like how the schedule was laid out, yes, traveling to Brazil is quite a haul in week 1, but we kind of expected the Packers to then have a home game in week 2 to make up for that. And the way that everything kind of fell, I think is going to really favor the Packers. Even the week 10 bye, I think, comes at a perfect opportunity to kind of prep you for that stretch. You end a division game, go into the bye, come out of that with a division game, and then you've got, kind of your playoff push at that point. You've got the Niners, the Dolphins, the Lions, the Seahawks, the Saints, and that's going to be some tough sledding there, I think. So I just I was impressed, I think. I came away with from this schedule, one, wanting to go to just about every home game because I really like the matchups that the Packers have this year, but two, just normally there's like areas of the schedule where you're like, "Oh, this is going to be, such a tough stretch for them." And I didn't really find a point looking at the schedule where I was like, "Oh yeah, this is going to be, it's like you just want to go like just want to go 2 and 2 here, just want to come out of this one." And I didn't feel that way this year.
I mean, I would counter by saying I think San Francisco, Dolphins, Detroit is a tough 3-game stretch,
Yes.
especially, um, given, the history with San Francisco. The Dolphins are an offensive juggernaut, at least they were this past season, and Detroit being the Packers' main division rival at this point. That is where I have it circled as being the tougher stretch, but it's so far into the season and so much can happen by week 12 that it's kind of a little bit difficult for me to look like too far ahead of being, oh, they just have to go 2-1. We have no idea what
Right.
any of these teams are going to look like at that point. Again, too, you look at Seattle week 15. Who knows what Seattle is
Who
going to
knows?
look
Yeah.
right at that point. So, and Seattle is that a home game or
Away.
away? Right. So yes, Seattle is historically a tough place to play as well, and you are going across to the West Coast. So, but I do generally agree with you. I think it's a favorable schedule. I think it's a fair schedule. I love the middle bye. I know Matt LaFleur is probably loving that bye because they've had some really wonky buys, really late in the season, really early in the season. And then, like we said, they have that kind of mini bye later in the season, potentially get healthy for that like late season push. I had to laugh, obviously, wrapping the season with the Bears. Always wrap the season week 18 now, not 17, week 18 with the Bears. Like, there's no other way to do it. I am pretty pleased that they're not having a season opener against a division rival. I think
Yeah.
that's the first time in a number of years that's happening. So that'll be really fun to have like kind of a random AFC opponent that they don't see very often come to Lambeau Field week 2. Anthony Richardson, who
Gonna
we
be
haven't
fun.
seen play in a number of months at this point. But that will be very, very fun to see like a young budding Colts offense up at Lambeau. Question for you,
Okay.
because I think you and I both have the same answer, but I do want to talk about, I think, a few matchups, but like the one that you have circled as like the game that you're most excited about.
So every year I always look at the schedule, right? And then I try to pick out, I hope there's not, a game on X date or for this reason. And I'm sure everybody has that. Some people love holiday games, some people hate them. The two dates I always look for, one now is my son's birthday because that falls right in the middle of the schedule. So I always am very cautious about what games will be around his birthday. And then the other thing for that is this year, we had joked my parents are having a big anniversary party. And of course, that is the weekend of the Texans game, which is the one game that I did have circled that I was eyeing, probably as I honestly, I would have put money down that I thought that would be the opener. And I guess part of me would have thought, hey, you want them to come to Lambeau in the cold. But I certainly thought CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, that's gonna be like a premier matchup of the young guns. They're gonna wanna start the season that way, and I guess you could make the argument too that a healthy Anthony Richardson coming back kind of falls into that same category. So the Colts was my second matchup that I was most excited for, so that's convenient, I guess. But yeah, I absolutely think the AFC teams are really fun this year. And the fact that I think the Texans and the Colts were the two teams I was most intrigued by, were the ones that happened to be coming to Lambeau. I really liked that.
Yeah. Um, I also had the Texans. I for different I mean, for very similar reasons. Naturally, I think the CJ Stroud, Jordan Love had very similar first year as starter stories in the 2023 season. Coming in, everyone kind of doubted them. Naturally, CJ was picked second. Everyone thought Bryce Young was going to be the guy. He ended up having like this incredible offensive rookie of the year. You all watched the season, right? I don't need to recap it. Um, end up miraculously both teams making it into the playoffs. Just really awesome stories, easy guys to root for, likely future faces of the NFL in terms of like young quarterbacks. So super fun. Super fun Texans team is coming to Lambeau. It's an amazing matchup, one that I likely am going to attempt to come up to Wisconsin for. My one caveat here is that I'm shocked that it's a noon game.
Right. Oh,
I
1000%.
I would put money on this being flexed out.
Same.
I cannot imagine that by week 7, whatever primetime game is happening on this Sunday will stick.
Well, and
For
one
the
of the one of the matchups they had like kind of teased before the whole schedule release came out was week 2, and Sunday Night Football is the Bears and Texans, which I think is really interesting for like Caleb Williams to see what he looks like. He's going into that same potential category of being a young up and comer. I mean, the way that the NFL is treating him very much in the conversation is, potentially looking at one of those like faces of franchise players, and he's the first overall pick. We saw that coming miles away. Like, it makes sense to have that opportunity. But yeah, I was kind of surprised by that, to see that like right immediately in week 2 it's Texans and Bears. So maybe that's part of why the Packers and Texans didn't make the cut there in week 7. But yeah, I'm going to keep my eyes on the Texans a lot this year, because I think they absolutely could be the representative from the AFC, which honestly I don't think we've ever said that before ever about
I
the
know,
Texans, so
crazy.
that's pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah, so I I'm also looking forward to the Jacksonville game.
Mhm.
I think going down to Jacksonville is fun. Trevor Lawrence going away. I like that team. I like that matchup for the Packers. I don't know if the Packers, I'm trying to think back last time they went down to Jacksonville. Um,
It's not a good time.
no, I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, it's when they played the Saints technically, but
Yeah. Was that the 30?
yep, 31 to
Six,
3.
okay, yeah. So let's have a little redemption story. But I think all these kind of younger teams, or sorry, young QB led teams that the Packers have on their schedule is exciting. It's kind of it's the new wave. Um, and again, like you said, not a ton of like road stretches here, right? You get home, away, then you're back home for the Lions, and then you get your bye week. So just a very favorable schedule for a team that's going to be looking to make like a deep playoff push again this season.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting, like, normally you look at, I think it was, like, week 2 back in the early 20 teens, the Packers had the Dolphins, like, week 2 in Miami, and it was just so hot, and they were in their home greens, and, those are, I think, the things that a lot of teams look for as well. JJ Watt had said, like, you look for your opener, you look for your bye week, and then you look at, like, weather matchups. And looking at this, it kind of plays pretty nicely for the Packers. You're going to LA in early October, so I guess that potentially could be hot, but that stadium, you're not gonna have the elements at SoFi, so take that. The Cardinals are coming to Lambeau, uh, at Jacksonville in late October, probably not going to be as hot as it historically would be if you started the season there. And then you've got, the 49ers coming in late November, the Dolphins coming in late November, the Saints coming in December, right before
Yeah.
Christmas time. So you're bringing in all these teams that, even though the Saints obviously don't play outside, are warm weather dome teams, and you're bringing them into Lambeau in the elements. So normally we see the Packers having to slog through some really hot weather early, and it seems like instead that kind of was flipped this year, and the Packers are going to host some warm weather teams in the cold.
Yeah, it's true. I did see, I would have liked a few more December games at Lambeau. I think that's always that weather advantage is very real, but I will take, the more late November.
And Matt LaFleur is pretty good in December.
Yeah, he is
pretty,
historically good, and that
pretty
that is
good.
that is a thing. Any other matchups that you want to highlight?
I mean, selfishly, I obviously looked at the games that I wanted to get to. So the Colts right up there, the Texans, if I can somehow swing it, I would like to try, but I was also kind of intrigued by the Cardinals because they're such an interesting team to me. We obviously saw what happened when the Packers went down there a couple years ago, as an undefeated team. And then it seems like they've kind of fallen off and they don't really have an identity right now. But Kyler Murray is still fun. They have Trey Benson. They just took Marvin Harrison Jr. So, like, that offense could be really fun to watch. So, that's kind of a game that I'm like sneaky considering here, too. Just, you know, I love going to Lambeau in October. As much as I love the atmosphere of the home opener and as much as I love snowy games, mid-October at Lambeau is gorgeous. The colors are changing, the weather's like perfect. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a fan coming to Lambeau, one, tell us in the YouTube comments which game you have circled and tell us why. Like, what's your favorite weather to attend games? Because I've been to every kind of weather game, and that like mid-October is my favorite weather.
Yeah, I did do a mid-October with my family, and the leaves, like when you drive, because obviously we
Mhm.
flew into Milwaukee and we drove up, also got stopped by a trooper, and they thought because we had New York plates that we were there because we were there for the Jets game, and we were like, no, no, we're Packers fans. Story for another time. And the leaves are amazing. I would say October, like the leaves are amazing. The weather is still great. Wear like a good jacket. Not too cold yet. Get a good brat. Would love to hear everyone's, like you said, stories in the comments, what games you want to go to. I have made it a tradition to get to the home opener. TBD so far this year if that's going to happen, but I would love to go to the Colts game. I think that would be super fun. Ideally, obviously, if Maggie can swing it, the Texans game is what I have circled. I have yet to go to a snow game because I'm a little intimidated by it, but maybe this is the year.
It'd be fun.
Maybe this is the year. I personally think going to, I mean, not that I love the San Francisco 49ers, but I think finally seeing a Packers 49ers game live would be so much fun. I also think the Dolphins game, I just think this Dolphins offense and this Packers offense have way, way, way too much in common. Obviously, the coaches have a lot of history between the two. And I think seeing the next like evolution of this Dolphins offense, given that we have a year of tape on them, what our defense is going to do. I mean, the Packers defense is a whole big question mark, right? But I think it's going to be a test of whether this Packers defense can stop kind of a very speedy, I call him a juggernaut. I don't know if I necessarily mean that in the actual sense, but I think watching what they were able to do last season against really good defenses is they're going to be like ones to watch. But again, it's late in the season, so it's like you're going to watch these teams evolve, and by week 13, right? But I think it's hard not to look at the Dolphins as contenders, especially given where their division is,
Yeah.
because I mean the Bills are in like a little bit of a retool mode. The Patriots are starting from scratch.
The
The
Jets got
Jets
a tough schedule,
the Jets
really
are
tough.
a huge question mark because we have no idea what Rodgers is gonna look like coming back. So, like, it feels like this is the Dolphins' year if it's gonna be their year. And Mike McDaniel is gonna come in hot. So, I just think this matchup is gonna be really fun.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so what I normally do too with the schedule is I look and see teams that I haven't seen live yet. And I'll put a little asterisk if I've seen them in the preseason because I count it, as a team I've seen, but it doesn't necessarily count as much as like going to an actual game. So the Texans you and I saw in the preseason, obviously. So like technically got to cross that one off, but
We
not the
did.
same as seeing the actual starters out on the field. So it was a really good year, shook out for me. Haven't seen the Colts live, haven't seen the Cardinals live, haven't seen the Niners live. Those are the only 3 on this list that I haven't gotten to see live. So, I got some good
Wow.
options here to pick between. But yeah, every time the Dolphins come to Lambeau, it seems to snow. I was at that game a couple years ago and the flurries were coming down and that's when Raven Green had that like fake punt for a first down. So, really fun game. Just yeah. And I think one of the things that honestly surprised me the most, one, the gold package getting all the division games. I know that wasn't planned, but the way that that shook out I thought was fascinating because that never happens. And two, not seeing the Bears for the first time until November 17th. I thought that was really interesting. And I kind of like it because I think it gives the Bears a little bit of time to like garner an identity and you get to kind of study up on what they've done. I always think it's daunting to play division rivals in the first like couple weeks of the season because you don't know,
Mhm.
the turnover is so intense on like the Bears and the Vikings this year, new quarterbacks potentially that you just don't know what they're going to look like. So at least by the middle of November, you'll get a little bit of a sense at, who the Bears actually are. So I really liked seeing them in the middle of the season and not like week 3.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Um, it will be interesting to see, like, who the Bears are when the Packers go to Chicago after their bye week, week 11. Very interesting choice, schedulers, in doing that. I see you. Um, let's talk about the last division rival before we wrap the show in the Minnesota Vikings because they are the first division opponent
Yep.
the Packers see in week 4. It's home and they are just as much, if not a bigger question mark potentially than the Bears and definitely more so than the Detroit Lions, given that we don't really know what their quarterback situation is. And the Packers are going to see them the earliest. They still obviously have great offensive weapons if whomever it is under center, JJ McCarthy
Sam
potentially,
Darnold.
Dan Darnold, I don't know, is the one throwing them the ball, as well as, unfortunately, a very friendly face
Yeah, that one's gonna
in
sting. They did that early
in
on
Aaron
purpose. They
Donald.
just
But you said it, right? Is that, like, getting your division rivals early on can be both good and bad. There are definitely, like,
Mhm.
pros and cons to it. Your common opponents, but, um, you're also, you know, especially I think for the Vikings, there's a level of uncertainty in who they are, it could be tricky because they
Yeah.
could throw out things that the Packers aren't necessarily prepared for.
Yeah, and I mean, I think all of these offenses have gotten more explosive, and we talk every year about what the Packers defense is gonna look like, but there's some big tests that are coming up early. Obviously, we know that starting right away in week 1, you've got Jalen Hurts, who's a mobile quarterback, and you've got guys like, you know, their whole core. Devonta Smith is on there, AJ Brown, like these are significant receiving threats. So the Jeff Hafley defense is going to get a workout here early. Colts, obviously Anthony Richardson, known for the same thing, scrambling with his legs. And then you've got like some juggernaut receivers, right? Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison is coming, Aaron Jones, who we don't really want to talk about seeing. So there's like some big offensive tests, I think, coming early for this defense and what they're able to do and how they look. And I'm not saying, like we're going to use 4 games here to decide if Jeff Hafley was a good hire, but it is going to be really intriguing to see, how this defense approaches some of the quarterbacks that we've seen historically the Packers struggle with in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Um, wow. All right, we have our schedule. Any final thoughts?
I just can't wait to try to figure out which games I'm gonna go to. And I
I
think
know.
this schedule, it builds, I think, really nicely. We talked about there's that, like, stretch of night-ish games. I say ish because the Niners aren't technically a night game, but that I think is, the really challenging stretch of the season potentially, even if you count as early as the Lions and then going into the bye and coming out of the bye. Those games are all gonna matter. You always wanna win your division games. You wanna win the NFC games, so the Niners, like, being at home helps, but yeah, I think it stacks nicely for the Packers to kind of figure out who they are and start to get really comfortable and, stack the noon games and then go into prime time when they're ready for it and are intense and making that playoff push.
Yeah. They have to stack the noon games though, because
Yeah.
I think the schedule does only get harder
Mhm.
and the stakes only get higher as you go along in the season, especially in prime time, like lights are bright. And they are still a young team with those expectations. So I agree with you. It does like build really nicely. But you said it just now, like some big tests early on, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So they're kind of getting thrown in the deep end,
Yeah.
which can both be good and bad when you need to get a few like important early wins. But I feel strongly that I'm not going to put like a number on
Yeah.
wins at this point. It's May, but I feel strongly that this team is being set up for success because I've seen a few schedules, like you mentioned, the Jets and like the Steelers. I've seen in a few other schedules where I'm like,
Yeah.
sorry. The Packers were given, I think, a nice fair shake.
Yeah. I think, kind of furthering your point, not that any of the games in the beginning are layups, of course. I don't look at teams that way, but and even like the Colts and the Texans are just so unfamiliar at that point as AFC teams, and we expect them to be good, but it's an uncommon opponent that you never see. So that adds its own
Mhm.
wrinkle as far as difficulty. But I think things really heat up the Lions game going into the bye. And what I think is interesting about the schedule too is you've got the Niners, which again, not a night game yet. I don't think that the schedule makers would flex that since the Packers are then going into 4 night games in a row, but once you come out of your night games, you end the season with 2 division opponents that would just love more than anything to play spoiler. So it's not like you get to end the season with, a layup or if, it's gonna just build in intensity and stay intense until the playoffs, which I think is exactly what you want when you're a team trying to make a playoff push.
100%. Absolutely. Um, all right.
That'll
We
do
did
it.
it. Yeah,
Yeah. Can't wait to decide where we're going now.
I know. We'll talk about it and we will let you know when we know which games we will be at.
Absolutely. I'm sure it'll come up and it'll affect when we record. So you'll have to know that too. But thank you, as always, for listening to the show. You can find the podcast on Twitter at PWSS Podcast, Perry at Perry_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney. You can find us on YouTube if that's how you're listening. Thank you so much. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you don't already. And if you're listening in the audio format on any of the platforms, we appreciate those downloads as well. We'll be back next week with, we don't know yet, probably a deeper look at some of these matchups. We're also hoping to have some guests on soon to talk about the schedule, the matchups, all of it, because even though we're still in the off season, things are going to start ramping up here pretty quickly. And before you know it, we will be previewing some of these games. So thank you, as always, for listening to the show, and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.